But I mean, the word, if you're asking me to do word association, the word is weird. That's what everybody says about Texas A&M. And I mean, no disrespect to my friends who are Texas A&M fans and anybody who's maybe seeing this, but y'all know you're weird.
Welcome to Beat Everyone. I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com. We're back for another edition of our new series, Alabama football's best 15 games of the 21st century. We're counting down from 15 to 1. So far, we've done LSU 2014 and Florida in 2020 as 15 and 14 respectively. Today, it's number 13. And our pick for the 13th best Alabama football game from the 21st century is Alabama versus Texas A&M on the road in College Station at Kyle Field in 2013. Helping me to do this, as usual, Beat Everyone producer, Matt Scalici. Matt, thanks for coming back to relive the glory days.
Yeah, this is in the middle of such a tremendous run by Alabama. And obviously, this season did not end gloriously at all, but there were some great moments for this team in the 2013 season, and I think this is the best one from that year.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's just like a knockdown, drag out, heavyweight fight. And you look, as always, we're going to run through some categories like we do in this series about what we remember, what we loved about this game, the best plays, the best players, moments, and much more. But Matt, let's do our best again to sort of set the table here. The year was 2013, a cool 12 years ago. First of all, who was Matt Scalici back in September 2013?
Well, I was definitely covering Alabama and Auburn for AL.com, and I was not in College Station for this game, but I was definitely watching it, and one funny thing that jumps out to me about the day of this game, Ben, I'm pretty sure that this was like happening at exactly the same time, or maybe right before it, was a Michigan State game that had one of the most hilarious endings you will ever see to a football game. It was the notorious game that ended in Michigan State blocking a punt and returning it for a touchdown to beat Michigan. For whatever reason, that sticks out to me as being part of that day too. But I mean, this was a game that had a ton of hype building up to it. There was, there always is that sense of wanting to get revenge on the rare teams that actually did beat Alabama during this period. And sometimes you wouldn't get that opportunity. Sometimes you lose to South Carolina and you don't get your revenge on Steven Garcia. You don't get to have your revenge on Cam Newton. But Johnny Manziel came back because he had been a true freshman when he beat Alabama in 2012. And this was I think it's very different from Tebow, from the Tebow mania, because even though Manzel was sort of ubiquitous in college football and everybody was talking about him, he was not sort of held up as a poster boy. He was not quite as beloved and respected. He was kind of the bad boy of college football already. And, I think he was a precursor of the NIL era in a lot of ways, but Manzel was like, he was an easy character to get yourself riled up against. And I think Alabama fans wanted this one so badly. They wanted revenge on Manzel, and he was such a frustrating player to play against, and he proved no less frustrating in 2013. It's just that Alabama was able to figure some things out against this Texas A&M team.
Yeah, I guess like he was a rock star, right? Like he was like a rock star of college football. That I think that's a pretty close parallel.
He was hanging out with Drake.
Yeah, the OVO crew, is that what they're called? Like that, I remember there were references to OVO back then. He would always be doing this thing or whatever.
Yeah, the little money
got him
sign,
maybe got him into trouble a couple of times, maybe, I don't know. And that's referenced in this game by an Alabama player at one point, and we may talk about that. But we'll get into Manzel a little bit more because, I mean, he really is like the star of the show. He's the reason everybody's tuning in. Let's see what Manzel does to Alabama this time. But it was one of those games where I had to go. So I was there. A friend and I drove to College Station as spectators for this
Not
game.
an
I
easy
did bring
drive.
no. We drove to Houston, and then we stayed in Houston, and then we commuted to College Station for game day. So yeah, a lot of driving, but I mean that's like what we were willing to commit. It's like we wanted to see this game in person. This was a big event. I did take a camera. I documented like what pregame looked like, tailgate scene, fans, a football game atmosphere in East Central Texas there in College Station. But you know, A&M were still just a couple of years old as members of the SEC for this game, so Alabama fans were still kind of getting to know the team and their very unique culture. I missed yell practice when I went, by the way. I drove up day of the game, but you know, there's a lot of shared history between the programs, like sharing head coaches like Bear Bryant and Gene Stallings and even Dennis Franchione. These teams go way back, but you know, maybe Manzel aside, Matt, when I say Texas A&M, what's the first thing that pops into your head?
Well, I mean, I actually had not ever been to Texas A&M until a couple of years ago, and I had certainly heard people talk about them a lot who had experienced it. But I mean, the word, if you're asking me to do word association, the word is weird. That's what everybody
Oh
says about
man,
Texas A&M. And I mean no disrespect to my friends who are Texas A&M fans and anybody who's maybe seeing this, but y'all know you're weird, and that's
I
fine.
said
Like,
unique. I said unique,
unique
Matt.
is
Like
certainly, that's another
it's a
way of putting it.
euphemism. Yeah.
But like there is a something unique about every school in the SEC. What is, and I'll say this, I'll say what I genuinely think is a complimentary way of putting this about A&M. It's so it's so vastly different culturally from anything else in the SEC that I genuinely believe it's off-putting to opposing fans and players. I think it feels hostile and weird when you're there, and not in the same way as going to LSU, right? Where just everybody's like trying to be intimidating to you. Texas A&M feels like you have landed, it's, I would say, another planet, but it's more like another time. It's more like you have gone back in time somehow, and you everybody is speaking like it's 100 years ago. They're doing these sort of fan behaviors that feel more like they come from the leather helmet era, and it's refreshing in a way because so much of college football culture, I think, has kind of been turned into this melting pot where different schools have borrowed stuff from each other. You know, I'll give an example that Alabama fans will understand, that uh how many times have we seen Georgia adding some new thing they do in their stadium or on their campus, and Alabama fans are like, well, they just took it directly from us. They're just copying us. A&M hasn't done any of that. They haven't tried to be like all the other programs, and I think they are very unique to this day because of that.
And nobody's copying them, Matt.
Definitely
Nobody,
not.
nobody, nobody wants to copy them. But look, what I will say about the one time that I went, the thing that really struck me about the people was they were extremely nice
Oh,
when we were
absolutely.
out there
Yeah, yeah.
and walking around. Like 75% of the people say howdy. You're going to hear howdy 1,000 times when you're in College Station and on a game day for a Texas A&M game. And I was just struck by that, and I felt that was true when they came to Tuscaloosa. Nobody really knew what to think the year before. I think they all thought that they were going to get beat. I think they were excited about this new young player that they had, but they were coming into the defending champs, and Alabama was growing as a dynasty again. And they were nice then too, and they were just kind of glad to be there, glad to be in the SEC, glad to be playing at Alabama and soaking up like the history and tradition and everything. But so compliment to them. They're great, and they're very positive, and they're very, very intense about what they do, and it's a passionate fan base. So I got nothing but good things to say about my experience there.
And I will also say, if you've never been, an incredibly impressive campus in terms of the amount of building they have done there in recent years.
The money that they have.
It's very clear there's a lot of money going into that place, and it is very, I mean, it is something that, Alabama fans obviously are very proud of all the facilities that they've built up in Tuscaloosa. And A&M is one of the few, I think, that can rival what Alabama has built in terms of the actual facilities that they have dedicated to sports and to football specifically.
Yeah, it's like when you hear that like a movie has an inflated production budget, and it's like this movie cost $250 million. You know, it's like you want to see it on the screen, right? You
Oh
see it
yeah.
on the screen at Texas A&M, to say the least. Okay, well, Matt, let's hit the opening drive. We're going to contextualize the game. We're going to talk about what was happening at this point in the season, the state of the program, touch on a few key storylines heading into it. So Alabama, they're the two-time defending national champs going into this season. This is Nick Saban's fifth season as the head coach. They return AJ McCarron. He is now a 3-year starting quarterback and already one of the most decorated players in Alabama history. And they're fresh off of arguably the most dominant moment in program history, smashing Notre Dame 42-14 in the BCS championship in Miami for Saban's third title as the Alabama head coach. And you know, you could even argue, Matt, and I've argued this before, that this was the peak of Alabama football. That joyless murder ball brand that everyone in Tuscaloosa and most of the state loved, but pretty much everybody else outside of it hated. Matt, what do you think? Like, do you think that it's fair to say that this was Alabama football at its absolute apex?
I think so. I mean, you're talking about going into the 2013 season looking for a three-peat, which was an unthinkable feat in college football. And I think it was a very clear moment. I can remember, driving back to the airport after that game in Miami against Notre Dame, thinking, I this program has replaced what we used to talk about when we talked about USC, right? Like USC, for all the talk about the greatest dynasty in college football history, they only actually won really one national championship in that era. I know it's complicated, but
Don't take that AP championship away from them,
but
Matt.
Alabama just did it back to back BCS
Yeah.
championships, and they're making a run for a third. They're bringing back the quarterback. They're bringing back some key skill position guys on offense and a lot of great defensive players as well. And you're talking about they have the recruiting machine is so well oiled at this point. They are number one class after number one class. They've stacked them up for years now, and they should be, in theory, poised to do this again. And that will forever be a big what if, because of course we all know what happened in 2013. But they started off this season dominant win in the Georgia Dome over Virginia Tech to start the season, and then they got a bye week, and now this is essentially the first game of Alabama's regular season slate. They're going into the SEC schedule, game 2 of the season, and they're going up against. I'm looking at it right now. I believe this is correct that Texas A&M was ranked number 6 coming into this game. Alabama was number 1. So this is a colossal matchup for so early in the season.
Yeah, I mean, the expectations are really high for Alabama specifically. They have the chance to make history as the three-peat team, national championship 3 years in a row, and they appear to have the team to pull it off. I mean, they're obviously ranked number 1 in the country, right? You're right, this is the second game of the season, kind of a workmanlike win over Virginia Tech. It was never in doubt in Atlanta, and you mentioned they had the bye, so the anticipation with the bye especially was huge for a few reasons. You know, big and bad Alabama comes to town to play the 6th-ranked Aggies, and they're a top 10 team for really one reason. It's Johnny Manziel. And Matt, like going back to him, let's be clear about what the biggest storyline was heading into this game. The revenge factor was everything for Alabama fans, and I'm sure for the players and Nick Saban, because they were on the wrong end of the enshrinement of Johnny football when he came into Bryant-Denny Stadium and just ran and threw all over Alabama the season before in another instant classic that A&M obviously won. And I was going to ask you, Matt, and you kind of went into it a little bit earlier, but like, what do you remember the most, you think, about Johnny Manziel, sort of both the football player and the person?
Well, I was there at the 2012 game. I saw that in person. It was impossible to not be awestruck at what was happening in that game. And I also remember at the end of the game, I can remember Manziel kind of going over to the corner of the stadium where the A&M fans were sitting and looking like a god, a cult-like figure. And I mean, it was really impressive to sit there and see this kid as a 18-year-old commanding that kind of uh, uh, that kind of respect and admiration from his fan base. And I also remember talking to him. He for some reason they brought him to Miami for to meet the press after he had won the Heisman in the lead up to that national championship game between Alabama and Notre Dame. So he had like a little media availability there. And I remember talking to him and being very impressed. He's a very charismatic guy. And I definitely came away thinking this is a fun figure to have at the center of college football. Like college football is better when we have guys like this in it. And I think I think a lot happened between January and September of that year. I think that he spent that off season really enjoying being famous and being at the center of things. And look, many people have been in that situation and have been changed by it. It's hard to keep your head when people are treating you that way. And look, if you want to see the whole Johnny Manziel story, I'm sure there's a lot of documentaries out there about it. But ultimately, I still think this was a guy who in this period of time had some kind of magic about him, both on the field, like in his play. He just had incredible instincts on the field. But I think the team around him really enjoyed playing for him. And I think they enjoyed being around something like that happening, being part of that phenomenon that was going on.
Yeah, it was incredible to watch, and again, it was the whole reason I'm driving out to Texas to watch this game because Alabama does have this number one team, and they're on the cusp of making history. But I want to see Johnny Manziel play football live again for the second year in a row because I was in Bryant Denny for the 2012 game, and I had to be there for 2013, and it worked out to where I was able to get in. I was in the upper deck on a really hot day in College Station,
And it
but I
gets a
didn't.
different kind of hot there too.
Brutal, that flat hot.
Yeah.
We get the rematch, Matt, and I think this is on. I really do think this is on a short list of most anticipated games of the Saban era, and certainly my lifetime. Like I remember the Feinbaum callers, just like guaranteeing victory, right? Like everybody, Alabama fans were very cocky going into this game
because
they
very
just
confident.
thought,
Yeah.
they just thought there's no way he gets us again. We're going to get him. Saban's going to have a plan. They've got film on him now, that kind of thing. But obviously it was not the case, and we're about to get into why. So, Matt, this is a classic 2:30 kickoff broadcast by CBS. Vern and Gary are on the call, and they're hemming and hawing from the jump. And they had good reason to because Manzel got the ball on the first possession, and he put on a show immediately. Big run, big pass to Mike Evans, who's an important character in the story of this game, we should say, as was poor John Fulton, who had the unfortunate task of having to cover Mike Evans up and down the field. A&M takes less than 3 minutes to score, and then Alabama goes 3 and out for 0 yards, and Manziel gets it back. They score again on the next possession. They put Alabama in a 14-0 hole, and Matt, it looks like it might get pretty ugly at this point.
It was definitely a big here we go again moment.
Yep.
And I mean, because that's exactly how the 2012 game started too. It happened so fast. They got in a hole so early. And, I think there is particularly something about Manziel that makes it feel difficult to get a handle on things, right? Even that I would say there were even other games in the Saban era where Alabama got down 2 scores quickly, and you didn't quite feel panicked about it because you thought, all right, well, the luck can't hold. Well, that's not true with Manziel. The crazy stuff is gonna keep happening. He is going to be able to make things happen no matter what you change your defensive strategy to, no matter what your plan evolves into. He can't be predicted. And so because of that, he can't really be planned against.
I remember there was like this 5,000 word preview. I can't remember which site posted it, but the whole thing was like, this is why this is why Nick Saban's gonna stop Johnny Manziel in the rematch, right? And it was just this really detailed, like football vernacular heavy, defensive scheme focused piece, and it was wrong. It was wrong. They wasted their time. But they get down 14-0, but then Alabama remembers that they've got a pretty good team too. And Matt, they score 35 unanswered points in the game behind an impressive stretch by the defense, including a couple of interceptions, and what might be AJ McCarron's best game as a passer for Alabama. He hits Kevin Norwood on a 22-yard touchdown, DeAndrew White for a 44-yard score, and then Kenny Bell for a 51-yard screen pass to give Alabama the lead. And TJ Yeldon scores right before the half. They go up 28-14 at the break. They come back out. Alabama goes 3 and out again, and then what, in my opinion, might be the play of the game. And I hate to single this out early. A Manzel pass gets tipped. Vinny Sunseri ends up with it, and he goes the other way for about 73 yards. He jukes Manzel out of his shoes on the other side of the field on his way to a touchdown to give Alabama its first of its two 21-point leads in this game. And Matt, can we just take a quick sec here on Vinny Sunseri? Do you mind? I just want to do a quick aside, about him. So Vinny Sunseri, starting safety for Alabama. He's the son of a defensive assistant, Sal Sunseri. Steady defensive playmaker, great tackler, excellent on special teams, a good leader, ball hawk who made plays. And it was devastating later this season when he tore his ACL in a 52-0 win over Arkansas. So it's hard to look back on the Auburn game, for instance, and think like maybe Vinny Sunseri might have made a difference. It's a big what if, and there are a million of those in college football and sports. But I thought Sunseri, Matt, was just a fantastic player who had even more potential that got cut short by injury. Probably, I think, one of the more underrated guys from the Saban era. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, he is a guy who I can remember covering him as a recruit and talking to him on the phone before, back when he was still in high school. I want to say he played for Northside in Tuscaloosa.
Northridge.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
In Tuscaloosa, which it was not, I would say, not for a highly visible powerhouse football program in the state of Alabama. So he kind of flew under the radar as a recruit, and he wasn't a huge guy physically. So I think a lot of people looked at him coming in at Alabama and thought maybe this is kind of one of those guys that Saban brings him in because you want to have like attitude guys on the roster. You want to have guys who work hard, who push the starters, but this guy's not going to be a huge contributor, right? He's not going to be an NFL guy one day. And Vinny Sunseri wins a starting job, and he is a pretty spectacular ball hawk, like has such a good nose for anticipating a quarterback's decision making and getting to the ball. And he was hugely important, I think, in games where teams were going to attack Alabama vertically. This is an Alabama team that had a truly incredible front seven, who we will talk about later here. But that meant that mostly they were going to be the game plan to beat this Alabama team is you got to beat them downfield. And Vinny Sunseri was a huge part of this Alabama defense alongside Landon Collins back there. Just an amazing 1-2 punch of safeties.
Yeah, physical player. Like I said, good tackler. Like you said, nose for the ball. Just a solid defensive player. Again, injuries cut his career short prematurely. Ended his season in that Arkansas game, and it's a big what if, like I said. So A&M and Alabama, they throw punches back and forth. Johnny Manziel throws for 4 touchdowns in the second half. Alabama only scores 2 offensive touchdowns I believe in the second half or in the fourth quarter. I can't remember, with Kenyon Drake and Jalston Fowler. In the fourth quarter, Alabama's up 2 touchdowns, and it's looking good. But then Johnny Manziel hits Mike Evans for a 95-yard touchdown play to cut it to a 1-possession game. So, like, the stress levels just go way up. But AJ McCarron just so steady all game. He ultimately keeps A&M at bay. 10 different players have a reception, so he's throwing the ball all around the field. A&M scores a touchdown with 15 seconds to go, and then they fail on an onside kick. The game is over, 49-0. to 42. Matt, A&M gained 628 total yards to Alabama's 568. It is a shootout of the highest order, but Alabama causes 2 critical turnovers. They get the stops that they need. And the craziest thing about this to me, Matt, I mentioned that Alabama leads by 21 at 2 different points in the game, but at no point did a 3-touchdown lead ever feel safe with Johnny Manziel on the field.
Yeah, I think that this is not the kind of game that Nick Saban likes to play ever. If you had told him that the way they were going to have to win this is you're going to have to score like crazy, and you're going to have to consider every single defensive stop to be a gift from God, Saban would say, let's do it any way other than that. But that's how they had to win this game, and they had what it took at this point in the season to win a game that way. They had all of their offensive weapons fully healthy. And if you look, one of the things, Ben, you talked about AJ McCarron's performance in this game, 20 completions out of 29 attempts. So really not a ton of completed passes, but 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, a very clean, 70% passing game for AJ McCarron. And every single offensive touchdown scored in this game was scored by a different player. 49 points on the board in this game. Every single one of them were scored by a different player. You've got touchdown passes to Kevin Norwood, DeAndrew White, Kenny Bell, and then you've got runs from Jalston Fowler, Kenyon Drake, and TJ Yeldon, all 3 of your running backs. So Alabama is using everything they've got. They've got so many different parts that they can.
Yeah, they're loaded.
And they have to use every single one of them, and they do it. And I think, on the defensive side, as we said, it comes down to ultimately every single time you can stop A&M, it is a huge advantage because it was going to take everything you had offensively, and you just have to give your offense any kind of space to work with. And I mean, even if you take the interceptions aside, this defense gets not a lot of stops, but the ones they get are crucial, and they shift the momentum in the game to Alabama.
Matt, we're going to get into standout plays now. We're going to pick one for offense, one for the defense. Do you have one on the offensive side of the ball that stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Kenny Bell touchdown pass in particular, which put Alabama
that's my
up
pick.
21-14, a 51-yard pass. And Kenny Bell is one of those names that even when we do our lists of wide receivers on here, he doesn't come up a lot, in part because he also had a really bad injury that ended his season. But Kenny Bell was I would compare him to maybe a Jalen Waddle or a Henry Ruggs III type that was just blazing speed. He was such a vertical threat. And when they had him available on this team, that was the kind of thing he could do. And I think it changed the way A&M had to play defense for the rest of this game, seeing that they could take the top off like this and go right over them to score whenever they wanted with Kenny Bell, not to mention Norwood and White. That if you look at the rest of the game offensively for Alabama, it really shifts more in the direction of the ground game. And they end up with a dominant effort on the ground for the rest of this game, where TJ Yeldon finishes with 150 yards, plus Kenyon Drake chipping in another 50. And so this is a play that I think literally allows Alabama to start playing the kind of game they want to play. They're taking the air out of the ball. They're running clock. They're keeping A&M's offense off the field. It was a literal game changer.
Yeah, look, I mean, TJ Yeldon was the guy at this point. He had been Eddie Lacy's backup the previous season, and he was just a monster recruit that Alabama got last minute from Auburn, and 5-star guy, one of the biggest recruits ever for Nick Saban in Alabama. And he was great in this game. As in his second game as the starter, he had, like you said, 150 plus yards and was crucial to their victory. Kenny Bell, though, that's the play, right? The 51-yard catch and run. by him. He kind of, I like the guys that you mentioned. He kind of had a little Jamison Williams in him a little bit. I think just again, like you said, as a vertical threat, somebody who could kill you at any moment. He just, compared to the receivers that we always talk about, like we're building the perfect receiver. We're obviously going to go to those Tua, Mac Jones years when they just had a wide receiver room that was just out of this world. I will say though, Matt, that we talk about the Jerry Jeudy, the Devontae Smith, Henry Ruggs, Jalen Waddle wide receiver room. This wide receiver room obviously wasn't the level of NFL caliber or talent that one was, but think about who was on this team. We've already mentioned a few of them: Kenny Bell, Kevin Norwood, DeAndre White, and who is the number one receiver on this team? Amari Cooper. We haven't even mentioned his name on this team.
Largely locked down in this game, and that's probably to be expected that the defense is going to say, let's take away their best player,
but that is a deep.
Oh yeah,
core.
And they were all very different in their skill set too, I think, and they were actually also really experienced as a receiver core. This is a group that, you think about Kevin Norwood and DeAndre White, they had been around for a while, I think, at this point, or not DeAndre White, but Kevin Norwood was a part of the entire run here from 2011 through 2013, and you've got Amari Cooper, obviously, is also a big part of that. Christian Jones also on this receiving core and had a catch in this game, but like there were a lot of guys that got on the field, and I would say AJ McCarron, one of his strengths was despite having Amari Cooper on his team, he distributed the ball around very.
He saw the field.
Yeah.
He saw the field. He knew where everybody was, and that was never clearer than in this game. So I like the offensive pick. We got to go with the Sunseri pick 6 for defensive play, don't we?
I think so. I think it's certainly the most fun and the most spectacular defensive play, and it felt very, also from an emotional standpoint, I think it felt very demoralizing to Texas A&M that, you've gone into halftime down 28-14. You're not out of this game. You can still come back, and you come out on your opening drive and throw a 73-yard interception return that honestly, it shouldn't, by rights, it shouldn't have even been a touchdown. Alabama probably finishes that drive off anyway, but it's so funny that Vinny Sunseri basically gets caught, I think, around the 3 or 4 yard line, and it seems over, and he does this absolutely ludicrous jump to get himself over the goal line. And if you go and watch the play, it honestly is a comical ending to the play, but also really impressive physical effort from Sunseri to finish it off. And it did feel after that. Again, I've mentioned this before. I'm notorious about calling things too early, but at 35-14, that felt like A&M couldn't come back from it. And of course I was wrong. I was wrong about that.
Yeah. That's when I would have sent gonna lose. The gonna lose text. But the Sunseri, honestly, give him credit. Vernon Gary's call on the Sunseri pick 6 is really entertaining. Gary just is reduced to just like making crazy noises because nobody thought that Sunseri could make it into the end zone. Okay, Matt, the next category is the kill shot, right? The play by Alabama that effectively sealed the victory. Matt, I mentioned Amari Cooper, right? And there were so many touchdowns in this game. And I think even going up by 21 at various points, that could have been the quote unquote kill shot where A&M couldn't actually recover because the hole was just too big. But weirdly enough, Amari Cooper had a quiet game receiving, but his biggest contribution here, which might have been the play of the game ultimately, and what finally let Nick Saban and all these Alabama fans exhale a little bit, the A&M, when they're down 49-42, they kick a very bouncy onside kick, and Amari Cooper jumps on top of it. The game is over. Only then did you know that it was actually finally over, because if they recover that kick, 15 seconds is a lifetime to cover half the field for a game-tying touchdown for this A&M team. So that's my pick for the kill shot. What do you think?
I think you probably couldn't breathe easily until that happened. I agree. But I will also say, I think a crucial moment that had to happen to feel like Alabama had this in hand was their last full offensive drive of the game. They get the ball. They are up. They're up 42-35 because A&M is not going away. Alabama gets the ball with 8 minutes left in the game, and an eternity for A&M to not only tie this thing but potentially still win it. And I'll run you down. I mean, I can't even read all the plays. This is a 9-play, 65-yard drive that takes 5 minutes and 30 seconds off the clock. So this is
beautiful.
It's
a beautiful thing.
Killing drive. It's TJ Yeldon just hammering over and over and over again. Jalston Fowler had a couple of runs on this drive too, and ultimately ends with Jalston Fowler rushing, or actually it's a receiving touchdown to Jalston Fowler, a 5-yard pass from AJ McCarron to finish off this drive. And they have brought it down to 2.5 minutes, which is still plenty of time, I guess, in theory for this team. But boy, that goes from making this game feel like A&M is in control again to feeling like they are backs against the wall, desperation. They're going to have to make miracles happen. And that is a very different, I mean, it was a big vibe shift to have a drive like that late in the game.
Awesome. You kind of miss it. You know, Alabama turned into that team that would just score in one play, right? But they used to be a team where you say how many 6 plays for this drive here, like 5 or 6 plays. Alabama could
9-play drive.
Oh, 9 play. See, beautiful. Yeah, that's exactly. Oh, you said 5+ minutes. That's what it was.
That's right.
9 plays. Just like what a glorious thing, and that's the thing that like everybody really looked forward to, where Alabama just essentially like smothers the team into let's just say sleepiness. But I love drives like that, and I think you're right. Like that to me is like the ultimate kill shot when you just kind of like take it all away from them in slow motion. So Matt, let's name the MVP here. Like, who won the game? This is usually a player that we pick, but it can be a coach, it can be a broadcaster, someone who, you know, we just remember the most from the game this many years later. So Matt, who's the MVP of Texas A&M Alabama 2013?
So if I hadn't rewatched the game before this, I think I would have had a different answer. I would have talked about the offense, which scored, 49 points in this game and is really impressive. But like I said, the more I rewatched this, the more I thought every single time they were able to actually wrangle Johnny Manziel and stop him from scoring, it was a massive win in this game. That's the only way you're winning this game, is to stop A&M ever. And to me, watching this, CJ Mosley is the guy that they had clearly identified. It was his job to stop Johnny Manziel from having those big, explosive rushing plays in this game. And to be clear, Johnny Manziel still rushed 14 times for almost 100 yards in this game. He was incredibly dangerous all the time. But CJ Mosley made multiple crucial stops in this game. He had 12 total tackles in the end, and several of them were against Johnny Manziel when he would scramble. And sometimes it was a designed run. Sometimes it was there wasn't a receiver open within 3 seconds, and he would take off. And those few times that they were able to force A&M to punt, I think that's essentially what won Alabama this game. I don't think they win if they do not have a CJ Mosley at linebacker tracking down Johnny Manziel and stopping him from making even more spectacular plays than he made in this game.
CJ Mosley's like Noah Wiley on the pit. You just got to stop the bleeding, right? Stop the bleeding enough to get them to the OR, and they got to survive.
And in the end, your morgue is gonna fill up with some bodies, but let's maybe keep a few of those stalls empty.
Dark parallel, but look, I mean, they scored, they had 628 yards of total offense. I admire the pick, and CJ Mosley is great. And you're right, you only needed a few stops, right? Like, you only needed a few stops with Johnny Manziel, and that would be the big difference. And that's clearly what happened in this game. And so I appreciate the pick. But it's McCarron for me. I mean, he's 20 of 29 for 334 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, and he was just unbelievable in this game because, yes, you've got to get stops, but with Johnny Manziel and A&M, you got to outscore them. Obviously, you only need one more point than the other team, but you're going to have to score a lot of points. And AJ McCarron went round for round, punch for punch with Johnny Manziel. And Manziel nearly pulled it off again. I mentioned 464 passing yards, 5 touchdowns, and like you mentioned, the 98 rushing yards. He showed out again, and you can see it in Nick Saban's eyes at the end when they shake hands after this game. He is relieved that he never has to play that guy ever again. Let me do one more quick aside here, Matt. So many episodes ago, we did build the perfect Alabama quarterback, and controversially, in the eyes of a lot of our readers, McCarron was not on either of our lists. I think I may have picked him for intangibles, right? But in the graphic that we shared, we had Jalen Hurts for that. So just looking back at his career, the numbers, the success, etc., we all know who AJ McCarron is and what he did. Does AJ McCarron have a case for best Alabama quarterback of all time?
I think where you're going to make the argument is, I would say, wins and the outsized role that a quarterback plays in making those happen. He had a very robust offense around him that could do a lot of different things. He had a wide variety of different receivers available to him. He had incredible running backs. He had great offensive lines, and he also had great defenses helping him out as well. But I think AJ McCarron was a very dynamic personality. And if you've spent time around those teams, I'm sure fans have probably seen AJ interviewed, and I would say he does not display the fire in an interview setting that he had most of the time when he was actually in a game situation. And even it would last until after the game was over. When you'd be talking to him in press conferences, he still had it like left in him. He was still on fire from the game. He was a big personality. And I think sometimes teams benefit from having somebody like that in the locker room, a perfectionist and incredibly demanding quarterback of his team, held his teammates accountable. And I think sometimes it was probably difficult to deal with, but also I think it really, we hear so many guys, you heard earlier this week, Shaheem Carter, in my interview with him, talk about the standard, right? Like the team holding itself to a standard. And I think AJ McCarron is maybe the best embodiment of that in a player. But all of that to say, I think in terms of pure skill, there are other guys that I would put over AJ McCarron, but it's hard to argue against his accomplishments on the field.
Yeah, look, I mean, competitive is the word for AJ McCarron. Intense, right? He's a quarterback. I think he was probably most in the image of Nick Saban, and like you said in his interviews, he kind of sounded like a Saban mimic in a lot of ways, right? Like he was short with his answers. He was focused, intensity that I mentioned before. But I mean, if you're just looking at the stats, right? I mean, winningest quarterback of all time, he had 36 total wins. He was 36-4 as the starting quarterback, and obviously he has 3 seasons against Bryce Young's 2, against Tua's 2, against Mac Jones's 1, right? So 3 full seasons as a starting quarterback gives you a little bit of a leg up in terms of career statistics. But in terms of passing yards for a career, he's number 1. He's ahead of Bryce Young. Bryce Young only played 2 seasons, and he's not far behind AJ McCarron. So that just goes to show you how productive Bryce Young was. But it's obviously a different era of offense when it comes to how Alabama had to adapt as a passing team. And then you have passing touchdowns. AJ McCarron ranks 3rd behind Tua, behind Bryce Young in a single season. AJ McCarron had 30 touchdowns, I think, and 3 interceptions that year, so remarkably efficient. So I think he also is the leader in total. Let me look at the stat here. Total number of touchdowns responsible for. AJ McCarron's number 1 in terms of total combined offense. So number 3 in total touchdowns responsible for, just behind Tua and Bryce Young. So again, they did it in less time, which makes it really impressive. But I think a lot of Alabama fans, they come back to, he won 2 national championships as the starting quarterback. He was in play to win a 3rd straight. He was just shy for obvious reasons. But I don't know. I think that We do McCarron a little bit of a disservice when we leave him out of those Alabama quarterback GOAT conversations just because of all that he's accomplished. So I just want to give AJ McCarron the respect that he deserves in terms of the prism of Alabama football. We obviously know what Tua and Bryce Young and Jalen Hurts now have done at the next level in the NFL. AJ McCarron never reached those heights necessarily, but when it came to Alabama football and sort of like reestablishing the dynasty and being a face of that, and yes, he was surrounded by a lot of talent, I think AJ McCarron has a case. Would I make it for him ultimately? I don't know, maybe, but he has a case.
And you look at, I mean, just this game is such a great microcosm of why Saban liked him so much. And I think Saban would have said, I would actually rather have AJ McCarron as my quarterback than Johnny Manziel. As much respect as Saban, I'm sure, had for Manziel as a player, this is a efficient, mistake-free performance from AJ McCarron. Only 20 completions, like I said, fewer than almost 10 fewer than Manziel. Almost over 100 yards fewer than Manzel. But AJ McCarron finishes with 4 touchdown passes, 0 interceptions. Johnny Manziel finishes 5 touchdown passes, but 2 interceptions, one of which is returned for a touchdown. And ultimately, I think that's what Saban wanted. He wanted guys to keep a cool head, play efficient football, and I don't need spectacular out of my quarterbacks. I don't need it out of anybody on my offense necessarily. That's not how we're built. We're built to wait for the other guys to make mistakes, and then we will calmly march down the field on a 9-play drive and hammer it down your throat with TJ Yeldon and finish you off. And that's how he liked to win in this era of Alabama football.
Take care of the ball. That's what AJ McCarron was able to do. And you know, a lot of people label him game manager, right? But he won a lot of games with his arms. He won with his arm. He won a lot of games with just his ability, like we said, to see the field and to win. He could see everything. He managed the game very well. Yes, that's true. But I think he was a little bit more than that. Okay. All right, Matt, last category, takeaways. What were the consequences? Does this game look any different with the benefit of history? Look, Matt, I'll start. This game exercised the Johnny football demons for Alabama fans. Here's what I have to say to Alabama fans and what I want them to remember when it comes to him. You survived the Johnny football experience unscathed, right? Okay, he beat you in 2012. That's true. But Alabama went on to win the national championship in dominant fashion that season. So it didn't matter. And in the rematch that we've just discussed, Alabama beat him on his home turf in an instant classic. So in the end, not so bad. I know that the newfound gray hairs on your head might have told a different story both of those years, but you won both of those years essentially. Like for me, Matt, like it was a privilege to watch Johnny Manziel live. Like this was a quarterback, the likes of which we never seen up to that point. Like he dazzled the nation with his scrambling, with his playmaking. Like nobody had an answer for him. He was worthy of winning the Heisman. He was one of the greatest college football quarterbacks of all time. And yes, a thorn in the side of Alabama. What was your main takeaway here?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's funny to go back and look at this 2013 A&M team that had so much expectation placed on it. And in the end, they finished 9-4. They end up in the Chick-fil-A Bowl, which at the time was not as prestigious, I would say, as maybe it is now. But they end up with losses later in this season to Auburn, to LSU, and to Missouri. And that was a Missouri team that went to the SEC championship that year. They were an incredibly powerful offense, but a lot like this game, they had some major defensive deficiencies that I think kind of wasted Johnny Manziel's spectacular abilities. And, you know, in the end, if you want to talk about the consequences of it, I think Kevin Sumlin kind of failing to take advantage of this incredible talent when he had it is part of what ended up costing him his job in the end. They came out the next year and did not adjust. They had another player they thought was going to be a spectacular quarterback, and he absolutely was not. I believe Alabama thoroughly dismantled them when they met in 2014. And really, Alabama would end up looking a lot more like these Kevin Sumlin Texas A&M offenses going forward, starting in 2014 when they would bring in Lane Kiffin. And this was kind of the end of an era for this style of Alabama offense. But I think also, if you want to talk about did this game show us anything, I think it certainly showed us that as good as this team was and as good as the defense was, there were opportunities to be had against them. There were some cracks in the armor, and it was mostly schematic. I don't think it was talent at all. I think Alabama was falling a little bit behind the times defensively in terms of scheming against some of these high powered offenses. And that's ultimately what would come back to bite them later in the year in 2013 against an Auburn team that had in its first year under Gus Malzahn had figured out how to attack teams like Alabama. And it's funny because sometimes you can go back and look at a win and say you can see the seeds in here of why this team ultimately kind of had a downfall in the end. And for Alabama, at least, we have the luxury of knowing that loss that would come later that season pretty much directly led to a wholesale shift in offensive philosophy and defensive philosophy for Alabama, and it was a change for the better in the end.
Yeah, well, just running through like what happened the rest of the season, Alabama dominated the rest of the season. I mean, they killed everybody. They blew out Ole Miss, blew out Arkansas, Kentucky, Tennessee, and even LSU, a 21-point win in Bryant-Denny Stadium. That's when AJ McCarron, when Nick Saban jumps into the arms of AJ McCarron after they left Zach Mettenberger on the field for straight sacks, and then we all know what happened. Obviously, the three-peat bid is cut short with the kick six. Auburn beats them on the final play of the game. A miraculous finish to it. Alabama misses the SEC championship. You mentioned Missouri. Auburn just crushed Missouri in the conference title game. Alabama misses their shot at Jameis Winston and Jimbo Fisher in the final BCS championship game. And then Alabama loses to Oklahoma in the Sugar Bowl. AJ McCarron's career ends. There is finally uncertainty at the quarterback position in Tuscaloosa. Doug Nussmeier leaves as OC, and Saban, as you said, hires Lane Kiffin the next season. Matt, I mean, I was going to ask you, you kind of talked about it a little bit, but I wonder, like, what do you remember most about this 2013 Alabama team? Like, do you consider them underachievers or just like one of those great teams that just fell short that year? It just didn't go their way. Or are they stained by the kick six forever? Is that their legacy, or do you think a little bit more of them?
I really do think, especially when you go back and look at this schedule. I mean, like you said, Ben, this Texas A&M game was the only one that was even close the entire season. They crushed everybody they played. And it's not like they had, I mean, this was not the strongest schedule Alabama ever played against, but the Ole Miss team they beat 25-0 was a ranked team. They beat a top 10 LSU team very easily. And unfortunately, this is one of those cases where in the BCS era, in the pre-playoff era, all it took, I mean, this Auburn team already had a loss, right? So they already were sort of behind Alabama that season in the rankings. But because of the way that divisions worked, all it took was Auburn beating Alabama, and that got them in to the SEC championship. And Alabama's essentially locked out from that point on. A perfect season all the way down to nothing. And that's, some people liked that. And I would say there were a lot of times where I thought that made college football dramatic in that era. This team, this Alabama 2013 team, is kind of the prime example of why a playoff can be a good thing. I think there's a lot of people who would still say this was the best team in college football that year, but because of the way the postseason worked, they didn't get a shot at it. And look, I'm not saying they deserved one. They had the game in front of them and they didn't win it. And I would chalk at least a good chunk of that up to bad luck. I think the 2013 Alabama team was very unlucky. And I think they also, it was the first of what would be quite a few examples of Gus Malzahn out coaching a Nick Saban coaching staff and being clever and having something up his sleeve that Saban just wasn't prepared for. And, the legacy I think is a lot more than just 2013. I think it kind of goes down to, uh, Gus Malzahn was a guy who just so thoroughly prepared to play Alabama every year. And he was an incredibly clever coach that always had something ready for this team that they weren't ready for. And this was the first time that he was able to pull that off. And it cost Alabama everything that year.
Yeah, well, too bad, because Auburn wasn't satisfied and they fired the guy who beat Nick Saban 3 times.
I'm sure that's worked out. I'm sure that's worked out for the best for them.
Yeah, what is it? 5 straight Iron Bowls now for Alabama against Auburn, and a saga of just steadiness and down there on the plains and everything. So yeah, the guy who is best at beating Nick Saban, the thing you really want to do, wasn't good enough. So too bad. But Alabama will face him in 2025. He's the OC for the Florida State team, and so he gets another shot at him. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Okay,
I think Gus is probably in his lake house right now, scheming up something for Alabama in that season opener, and his family's trying to get him to come out and fish or hang out at the pool, and he's in his office coming up with some absolutely obscure rule from 1908 that he can exploit against Alabama.
He's like, not now, Christy. I'm watching Beat Everyone. They're talking about me in the kick 6. I'll be out in a minute.
All
right. Well,
that's Gus.
That's number 13 on the list of Alabama football's 15 best games of the 21st century. Do you agree with our picks? Let us know in the comments. We want to hear from you. You can find Beat Everyone on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. And our thanks, as always, to our friend and Beat Everyone producer, Matt Scalici. Always appreciate you helping us relive these amazing games. And I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com, and thank you. We will see you next time for number 12.